The stagecoach door flew open, and the first thing Nora Whitaker saw was the barrel of a gun. The second thing she saw, the man holding it, made her breath stop. Those cold gray eyes, the scar cutting through his left brow like a lightning bolt. She would know him anywhere. The man who had destroyed her life 5 years ago now stood pointing a revolver at her heart, and all she had to defend herself was a torn scrap of scripture in her pocket. The Texas sun burned white-hot as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty road. Inside, Nora smoothed her worn blue dress over her knees and checked the little watch pinned to her bodice. Almost noon. The other passengers dozed in the sticky heat. A plump merchant snoring beside his silent wife, a young cowboy nervously thumbing his hat brim. None of them noticed how Nora's hands shook as she touched the bullet she wore on a chain around her neck. Her fiancé's last gift, the one that had killed him. Outside, a jackrabbit darted across the trail. Then, crack, a gunshot split the air. The coach lurched as the driver yanked the reins. Nora's head smacked against the wooden frame as the world tilted. Screams filled the cramped space as they skidded to a stop in a cloud of choking dust. Everyone out. Now, a rough voice barked. The door wrenched open. Sunlight poured in, silhouetting the broad-shouldered man standing there. His black hat shadowed his face, but Nora knew. Oh, she knew. Clayton McCullough, the butcher of Waco. The man whose gang had shot her fiancé dead before her eyes on what should have been their wedding day. One by one, the passengers stumbled out, hands raised. The merchant was crying. The cowboy looked ready to wet his pants. Nora moved last, her legs steady despite the fear clawing up her throat. Clay's eyes locked onto hers as she stepped down. For a heartbeat, just one, his gun wavered. His lips formed a word she couldn't hear. Then his expression hardened back into ice. Purse. Jewelry. Now. He held out a gloved hand. The merchant's wife sobbed as she dropped her rings into Clay's saddlebag. The cowboy fumbled with his money clip. When Clay turned to Nora, she didn't reach for the simple brooch at her collar. Instead, she pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket and pressed it into his palm. His brows furrowed. He glanced down at the smudged ink. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Jeremiah 29, verse 11. When Clay looked up, his eyes burned with something hotter than anger. What's this? Nora lifted her chin. Your ransom. A shout came from the road. One of Clay's gang members waved wildly. Riders coming. Lawmen. Clay stuffed the paper into his coat without reading the rest. He backed toward his horse, gun still trained on Nora. For 5 long years, she dreamed of this face, prayed for this soul, feared this moment. Now she saw it, the faint tremor in his trigger finger, the way his breath hitched when their eyes met. The devil who'd haunted her nightmares was just a man, a broken, furious man. As he wheeled his horse away, Nora's final words chased him into the dust. I forgive you. Whether he heard or not, she couldn't tell. But the scripture verse rode with him, tucked against his heart like a seed waiting to grow. The bullet had been meant for her. Nora touched the cold metal hanging from her neck as the stagecoach rolled away, leaving her standing alone on the dusty road. The lawmen had chased Clay and his gang into the hills, but she knew they wouldn't catch him. Men like Clay McCullough didn't get caught, not unless they wanted to be. She adjusted the straps of her travel bag and started walking. The ranch wasn't far now. Just over the next rise, past the skeleton of a dead oak struck by lightning years ago. The land here still bore scars from the war, charred fence posts, overgrown trenches where soldiers had dug in. But where others saw brokenness, Nora saw possibility. Whitaker's grace stood like an answered prayer at the end of the trail. The main house, once a crumbling cavalry outpost, now had fresh whitewash gleaming in the sun. The barn doors hung straight on their hinges, and the fields, the fields were alive with golden grass and wildflowers, dotted with the dark shapes of grazing cattle. A child's laughter rang out as she reached the gate. Two little boys tumbled in the dirt, playing with a carved wooden horse. They froze when they saw her. Miss Nora. The smaller one scrambled up, eyes wide. Stagecoach get robbed again? She ruffled his hair. Nothing we can't handle, Eli. The screen door slammed. Louisa, her forewoman and closest friend, came striding across the yard, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. You're late. We expected you yesterday. Had to take the long way. Nora unclasped the bullet necklace and dropped it into her pocket. The Johnson boys deliver supplies? Louisa nodded toward the barn. 2 wagons full. And trouble. Inside the shadowy barn, a man lay sprawled on a pile of hay, one arm flung over his face. His boots were caked with mud, his shirt torn at the shoulder. Even in sleep, his body looked tense, ready to spring up fighting. Nora's breath caught. Clay McCullough. His gun belt lay in the dirt beside him, pistols still holstered. A blood-stained bandage peeked from beneath his sleeve. Louisa crossed her arms. Found him passed out by the creek. Bullet graze on his arm. Fever's got him talking nonsense. What did he say? Mostly about you. Louisa's dark eyes searched Nora's face. Called you the preacher's woman. Said he killed you years ago. The hay rustled as Clay stirred. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, landing on Nora. For a heartbeat, she saw raw terror in his face. Then his gaze sharpened into recognition. You. His voice was rough as sandpaper. This you're doing? He lifted his injured arm. Nora knelt beside him. God's more likely. That wound's infected. He tried to sit up, but the fever stole his strength. His skin burned under her fingers as she checked the bandage. Why'd you bring me here? He muttered. She peeled back the blood-crusted cloth. Because this is what we do. We take in the broken. Outside, the orphan Eli peered through the barn slats, his small face pale. When Clay's eyes met the boys, the child whispered one word before running away. Monster. The nightmare always started with fire. Clay jerked awake, his good hand fumbling for a gun that wasn't there. Early morning light filtered through the barn walls, painting stripes across the hay where he lay. His arm throbbed, but the burning fever had broken. Someone had left a tin cup of water beside him. He drained it in one gulp. Voices drifted from outside. Women's laughter. The clang of a breakfast bell. The normalcy of it set his teeth on edge. He stood slowly, testing his balance. His guns were gone, but his knife still rested in its boot sheath. Small mercy. The barn door creaked when he pushed it open. Whitaker's Grace sprawled before him, alive with morning activity. Women in plain dresses carried baskets of eggs. Children chased chickens. Near the well, a group of freedmen repaired a wagon. And everywhere flowers. Climbing roses on the porch. Sunflowers by the fence. Like someone had tried to pretty up a battlefield. Then he saw her. Nora stood at a long table under the cottonwood tree, slicing bread for a line of children. The morning sun turned her brown hair to gold. She looked peaceful. Nothing like the screaming bride he remembered from Waco. A shadow fell across Clay's path. Move along, gunslinger. Louisa blocked his way, a rifle resting casually over her shoulder. Breakfast is for working folks. Clay eyed the weapon. I don't recall asking for an invitation. Then you'll starve. She didn't blink. Nora's voice cut between them. Louisa let him eat. The forewoman stepped aside, but her glare promised trouble. Clay took a seat at the far end of the table. The orphan scooted away from him, their whispers sharp as knives. Stagecoach robber. Killed 100 men. Pa said he burns churches. Nora set a plate before him. Eggs, cornbread, honey. Eat, then you'll work. Clay snorted. Doing what? Chopping wood. Mending fences. She met his gaze. Paying your debt. A commotion at the gate saved him from answering. 3 riders approached, their fine suits out of place in the rugged landscape. The lead man tipped his hat to Nora. "Miss Whitaker, we've come to make our offer again." Nora's smile didn't reach her eyes. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Cale." Clay went very still. Silas Cale, the so-called preacher, leader of the gang Clay had ridden with for 5 years, the man who'd ordered the attack on Nora's wedding. Cale's gaze slid to Clay. A slow grin spread across his face. "Well now, looks like you've taken in another stray, Nora." His voice dropped to a mock whisper. "Careful, this one bites." The children froze. The women edged closer together. Only Nora stood her ground. "The ranch isn't for sale." Cale leaned on his saddle horn. "See, that's where you're wrong. That oil seep we found, turns out it's part of a bigger field. Runs right under your precious refuge." He tossed a bag of coins at her feet. "Last offer. Be smart." Clay's hand itched for a gun. Nora didn't blink. "Only thing you'll get from me is a prayer for your soul." Cale's smile vanished. He wheeled his horse around, but not before locking eyes with Clay. "Midnight," he mouthed. Then louder. "You've got till Sunday to change your mind, Nora. After that—" He tipped his hat again. "We'll change it for you." As the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, the little boy Eli tugged Nora's sleeve. "Miss Nora, what's oil?" Clay answered before she could. "Trouble, kid. The kind that gets people killed." Nora turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Then I guess it's good we've got a killer on our side." The breakfast bell rang again, but no one moved. The game had changed, and Clay wasn't sure which side he was on anymore. The moon hung low over Whitaker's grace when Clay slipped from the barn. His arm still ached where the bullet had grazed him, but the fever was gone. Cale's men would be waiting at the old mission ruins. Midnight, just like he'd said. Clay moved like a shadow past the sleeping houses. He didn't need his guns. He knew a dozen ways to kill a man with his bare hands. A light burned in the main house window. Through the glass, he saw Nora bent over a thick ledger, her fingers tracing columns of numbers. The sight made him pause. This woman should have been dead because of him. Instead, she sat there worrying over ranch accounts like any ordinary day. He turned away and nearly tripped over the boy. Eli crouched in the dirt, clutching that carved wooden horse to his chest. His nightshirt was too big, the sleeve swallowing his small hands. "You gonna kill us?" the boy whispered. Clay's gut twisted. "Go back to bed, kid. Miss Nora says you're sick. That's why we gotta be nice." Eli held out a chipped cup. "Brought your milk." The cup trembled in the boy's hands. Clay took it just to stop the shaking. The milk was warm, probably stolen from the kitchen. "Why'd you call me monster before?" Eli's chin quivered. "My pa said you killed 100 men. Said you shot a preacher during Sunday service." The words landed like punches. Clay set the cup down carefully. "Your pa tell you why?" The boy shook his head. A branch snapped nearby. Nora stood at the corner of the house, a lantern in one hand, a rifle in the other. The light painted gold streaks across her worried face. Eli ran to her, burying his face in her skirts. Nora's free hand came up to stroke his hair, but her eyes never left Clay's. "You were leaving," she said. Clay flexed his injured arm. "Not your business. It is when you're still bleeding." She passed the lantern to Eli. "Go put this back in the kitchen, sweetheart." Then straight to bed. When the boy was gone, Nora stepped closer. Moonlight caught the silver streaks in her brown hair. She looked older than she had 5 years ago. "Tired. You know Cale will kill those children," she said quietly, "just like he killed their parents." Clay's hands curled into fists. "Not my problem. Then why are you still here?" The question hung between them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. Clay turned toward the sound, toward the mission ruins where Cale waited, toward the life he knew. A small hand tugged his sleeve. Eli had returned, his face scrunched with determination. He held out Clay's gun belt. "If you're gonna fight, You'll need these. Nora made a soft sound at her throat. Clay stared at the offered weapons. The ivory handles gleamed in the moonlight, each notch filed smooth by years of use. Notches that stood for lives taken, for mistakes he could never undo. He took the belt slowly. The weight felt familiar. Right. Then he dropped it at Nora's feet. Keep them. His voice sounded rough. I'll use the axe. The axe bit deep into the log, splitting it clean down the middle. Clay wiped sweat from his brow and reached for another. He'd been at it since dawn, working through the pile behind the barn like the devil himself was chasing him. His arms burned. His wound throbbed. He welcomed the pain. Thought you'd be gone by now. Louisa leaned against the barn wall, sharpening a skinning knife. The morning sun turned her dark skin golden. She watched him like a hawk watching a mouse. Clay swung the axe again. Changed my mind. Funny timing. The knife hissed against the whetstone. Cale's boys rode through town last night telling folks you turned traitor. The axe missed its mark, sending wood chips flying. Clay straightened, breathing hard. What else they saying? That Whitaker's grace will burn by week's end. Louisa tested the knife's edge with her thumb. They offering money for information. Heard one of them asking about some underground chapel. Clay's blood ran cold. The chapel was Nora's secret, the heart of her refuge. If Cale found out, a child's scream split the air. Clay was running before he realized it, axe still in hand. He skidded around the corner of the main house to find Eli sprawled in the dirt, clutching his leg. A rusty nail stuck out from his bare foot. Nora reached the boy first, gathering him into her arms. Sure, it's all right. Let me see. Eli sobbed into her shoulder. Hurts. Clay knelt beside them. Without thinking, he pried the boy's hands away and inspected the wound. The nail hadn't gone deep. He'd seen far worse on the trail. Hold still, he grunted. One quick yank, and it was out. Eli wailed, but the worst was over. Nora pressed a clean cloth to the bleeding puncture, murmuring soothing words. Clay stood abruptly. His hands were shaking. That's when the fever hit him, like a runaway train. One moment he was upright. The next, the world tilted sideways. Strong hands caught him before he face-planted in the dirt. Burning up. Get him inside. Voices swirled around him as they half-carried, half-dragged him into the house. The cool darkness of the bedroom swallowed him whole. Time blurred. He dreamed of fire, of screaming horses, of a preacher standing between him and certain death, taking the bullet meant for Clay's heart. Pa said you shot a preacher during Sunday service. Eli's words echoed in his mind, but in the dream, Clay saw the truth. The preacher had been Nora's father, and he'd stepped in front of that bullet willingly. Someone pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. Clay's eyes flew open. Nora sat beside the bed, her face drawn with exhaustion. Moonlight streamed through the window, turning her simple nightdress silver. You were calling for your mother, she said softly. Clay's throat felt full of sand. How long? 3 days. She wrung out the cloth in a basin of pink-tinged water. The infection came back worse. 3 days. Cale would have made his move by now. Clay tried to sit up, but Nora pushed him back down with surprising strength. Louisa's keeping watch. The children are safe. She hesitated. You talked a lot in your sleep. A cold knot formed in Clay's gut. What did I say? Nora met his gaze squarely. About Waco. About my wedding day. Her fingers tightened on the cloth. About how you killed Daniel. The name hung between them like a noose. Daniel Whitaker, Nora's fiancé. The man Clay had gunned down without a second thought. He expected her to strike him, to curse him, to finally show the hatred he deserved. Instead, Nora reached beneath her collar and drew out the bullet necklace. I knew it was you from the first moment on that stagecoach, she said quietly. This bullet matches your Colt's caliber. Clay's breath came fast. Then why save me? Why bring me here? Nora turned the bullet over in her fingers. because my father's last words were forgive them. And I aim to honor that. The confession shattered something inside Clay. All these years, he'd carried the weight of that day like a millstone around his neck. The preacher's dying words had been forgiveness, and Nora had spent 5 years living that forgiveness out loud. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. Clay's fingers found Nora's wrist, circling it lightly. Cale won't stop, he rasped. Not until he gets that oil. Not until this place is ashes. Nora didn't pull away. I know. Then why stay? Why fight? For the first time since he'd known her, Nora smiled. It was a small, tired thing, but real. Because this is what grace looks like, Clay. Even for you. The words settled over him like a bomb. Like absolution. And for the first time in 5 long years, Clayton McCullough didn't feel like running. The fever broke at dawn. Clay woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, painting golden stripes across the quilt covering him. His body ached like he'd been trampled by cattle, but his mind was clear for the first time in days. He sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wound. The room was simple, whitewashed walls, a braided rug, a wooden cross hanging by the door. Nora's doing, no doubt. His gun belt lay coiled on the dresser like a sleeping snake. Clay reached for it out of habit, then stopped. The notches were still there. 57 of them. 57 lives taken. 57 mistakes he couldn't undo. The door creaked open. Eli stood in the doorway, balancing a tray twice as wide as he was. The smell of hot broth and fresh bread filled the room. You're supposed to eat, the boy announced, struggling to lift the tray. Miss Nora says food fixes near everything. Clay took the tray before Eli dropped it. Where's she? Chapel. Eli plopped onto the edge of the bed without invitation. They got a new family coming today. Freedmen from down Galveston way. Their little girl's sick with fever too. Clay sipped the broth. It was rich with herbs and chunks of potato. Why are you telling me this? Eli swung his legs, his 2 big boots thumping against the bed frame. 'Cause Miss Nora says we gotta help folks even when it's hard. Even when they're mean. He peered at Clay. You're kinda mean. The honesty startled a laugh out of Clay. It hurt his ribs. Your Miss Nora's too soft for her own good. Eli shook his head. Nah, she's the strongest person I know. She stood right up to Mr. Cale last week when he tried taking our milk cow. I slid down Clay's spine. Cale was here. Yep. Said he'd be back with fire if we didn't leave. Eli mimed shooting a pistol, but Miss Nora just prayed real loud and he rode off cussing. Clay set the tray aside with shaking hands. The fool woman was going to get herself killed. He stood, testing his balance. The room spun for a moment before settling. Show me this chapel. Eli's eyes went wide. You ain't supposed to be up. Now, boy. Something in Clay's voice made Eli scramble to obey. The chapel wasn't what Clay expected. No steeple, no pews. Just a low stone building half buried in the hillside behind the main house. The door was made of thick oak, banded with iron. More fortress than church. Voices drifted through the open windows. Nora's calm tones. A man's deep murmur. A child's weak crying. Clay hesitated at the threshold. He hadn't stepped foot in a church since he was 12 years old. Eli tugged his sleeve. You gotta take off your hat. With stiff fingers, Clay removed his hat. The cool morning air prickled against his bare head as he stepped inside. The chapel was dim, lit by a dozen candles. Rough-hewn benches faced a simple wooden cross. And there, kneeling by the front, was Nora. She cradled a small girl in her lap, maybe 4 years old, her dark curls matted with sweat. The child's parents hovered nearby, their faces drawn with worry. Fever will break soon, Nora was saying as she pressed a damp cloth to the girl's forehead. We have medicine that will help. The mother clutched a worn Bible to her chest. Ain't got much to pay you with, ma'am. Nora smiled. Grace isn't for sale. Clay's breath caught. The words echoed his own mother's, spoken a lifetime ago in another small chapel. A floorboard creaked under his boot. Nora looked up, her eyes widening when she saw him. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the quiet space. Then the little girl moaned, her tiny body shaking with chills. Without thinking, Clay crossed to them. He'd seen enough fevers on the trail to know a bad one. She needs willow bark tea. The father stepped between them, his big hands clenched. We don't want your kind near our child. Clay froze. He'd heard that tone before, the mix of fear and hatred. He started to back away when Nora spoke. Josiah, this is Clay. He's been helping us. She met the man's glare steadily. And he's right about the willow bark. The tension in the room thickened. Finally, Josiah gave a stiff nod and stepped aside. Clay knelt beside Nora, careful not to crowd the sick child. Up close, he could see the fever flush on her cheeks, the way her breath came too fast. Need to cool her down, he murmured. Nora nodded. Eli, fetch the medicine bag from the house, and more water. As the boy scampered off, Clay found himself reaching out to brush the girl's hot forehead. Her skin burned under his calloused fingers. Name's Lily, the mother said quietly. Clay's throat tightened. Lily had been his baby sister's name. He looked up to find Nora watching him, her expression unreadable in the candlelight. The chapel seemed to hold its breath around them. Then Eli came barreling back in, the medicine bag clutched to his chest. Miss Nora, riders coming. Lots of them. The chapel emptied in seconds. Clay followed the others outside, squinting against the midday sun. A cloud of dust rose from the eastern trail, too big for a few riders. A dozen at least. Josiah grabbed his wife and child. Cale's men. Nora shook her head. They're coming from the wrong direction. She shaded her eyes. And they're riding Indian ponies. Clay's pulse jumped. Only one man he knew rode with Comanches. Sure enough, as the riders drew closer, Clay recognized the lead horseman, tall, broad-shouldered, his long black hair streaked with silver. Taza, his blood brother. The Comanche warrior reined in his paint pony, just feet from where they stood. His dark eyes swept over the gathered group before landing on Clay. You look like death walking, Taza said in their shared tongue. Clay responded in kind. Feel like it too. What are you doing here? Taza swung down from his horse with easy grace. Heard Cale was hunting you. He nodded to the 5 warriors behind him. We came to watch your back. Nora stepped forward, her hands loose at her sides. You're welcome here, but we don't allow weapons in the chapel. Taza's mouth quirked. He unbuckled his knife belt and handed it to one of his men. The others followed suit. Josiah edged closer to Clay. You trust them? With my life. Clay switched back to English. Taza, this is Josiah and his family. And this is Nora Whitaker. Something flickered in Taza's eyes at Nora's name. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. Your father was the preacher at Waco. Nora went very still. You knew him. I was there that day. Taza's voice was gravel rough. Saw what Cale's men did. Saw this one. He jerked his chin at Clay. Try to stop it. The words hit Clay like a punch to the gut. You never told me that. Taza's expression darkened. You never asked. The truth settled over them, heavy as a wool blanket. Clay had been so consumed by guilt, he'd never questioned what really happened that day. Nora broke the silence. We should get Lily inside. As Josiah carried his daughter toward the house, Taza motioned his men to dismount. We'll stand watch tonight. Cale won't risk an attack with Comanche here. Clay nodded his thanks. How'd you find me? Taza reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the scripture verse Nora had given Clay on the stagecoach. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. Found this blowing across the plains like a prayer. Taza's smile didn't reach his eyes. Figured only one woman in Texas would try saving your soul with paper and ink. Nora flushed but held her ground. It was worth a try. Taza surprised them all by laughing. "White women," he said, shaking his head. Then to Clay, "She's either very brave or very foolish." "Both," Clay muttered. Eli, who'd been watching the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly tugged on Taza's sleeve. "Mister, can I see your horse?" Taza looked down at the boy, then at Nora. When she nodded, he lifted Eli onto the paint pony's back. "His name is Ghost Wind." As Eli whooped with delight, Taza turned serious again. "Cale's gathering more men. Says there's oil under this land worth killing for." Nora folded her arms. "We're not leaving." "Didn't say you should." Taza glanced at Clay. "But you'll need more than Comanche arrows and a preacher's daughter to stop what's coming." Clay met his old friend's gaze. "What do you suggest?" Taza's smile was all teeth. "A reckoning." That night, as the first stars appeared, Clay found Nora sitting on the chapel steps, her face turned toward the darkening sky. He sat beside her, their shoulders not quite touching. "You should get some rest." Nora shook her head. "Too much to do." She nodded toward the house where Josiah's family slept. "Lily's fever broke an hour ago." Clay studied her profile in the moonlight, the stubborn set of her jaw, the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. "You can't save everyone, Nora." "I know." She turned to him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "But I had to try with you." The honesty in her words stole Clay's breath. Before he could respond, a wolf's howl echoed across the plains, Taza's signal that all was well. For now, Nora stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Come inside, Clay. Tomorrow's coming whether we're ready or not." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Clay followed someone else's lead. The first thing Clay noticed was the smell: old wood, candle wax, and the faintest hint of roses. Taza had insisted on seeing the chapel before dawn, his sharp eyes missing nothing, as Nora led them down the narrow stone steps. The underground room was larger than Clay expected, with rough-hewn benches facing a simple wooden cross. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of preserves, medical supplies, and row upon row of books. "This is where we hide when trouble comes," Nora said, lighting the oil lamps one by one. The flickering light revealed carvings in the stone, names and dates, prayers etched by those who'd found shelter here. Taza ran a hand along the wall. "Smart. The earth keeps it cool in summer, warm in winter." Clay stopped before a particular set of carvings near the cross. The names jumped out at him: Daniel Whitaker, Gideon Hart, Lillian McCullough, his mother's name. Nora came to stand beside him. "Your mother's Bible is here, too. We found it in the rubble after." She trailed off, but Clay knew. After he'd burned Waco to the ground. Taza cleared his throat. "Cale will search here first when he comes." Nora nodded. "We have a plan. The children know to run for the canyon caves if—" A shout from above cut her off. Eli came barreling down the steps, his face flushed. "Miss Nora, riders coming. It's Mr. Cale and lots of men." Clay was moving before the boy finished speaking, taking the steps two at a time with Taza on his heels. Outside, the morning sun revealed a dust cloud approaching from the north, at least 20 riders. Josiah met them at the chapel door, his rifle in hand. They're making no secret of it this time. Nora emerged from below, her face pale but determined. "Get everyone to the canyon. Louisa knows the way." Josiah hesitated. "And you?" "I'll stay." "No." Clay grabbed her arm. "You're coming with me." She shook him off. "This is my home. My fight." Taza stepped between them. "Enough. The woman stays, but not alone." He whistled sharply, and 3 of his warriors materialized from the trees. These men will guard her with their lives. The Comanche warriors took up positions around the chapel entrance, their bows at the ready. Clay's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but the riders were closing fast. There was no time. Take this. Nora pressed a small leather book into his hands, his mother's Bible. The cover was worn soft with age. Go with Taza. Find what we need. Clay stared at her. What are you planning? Nora touched the bullet at her throat. What my father would have done. Then she turned and disappeared back down the chapel steps. Taza grabbed Clay's shoulder. We must go now. With one last look at the chapel, Clay followed his blood brother into the trees, just as Cale's men thundered into the yard. The cave stank of bad guano and damp earth. Clay crouched near the entrance, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They'd ridden hard for hours, following game trails even Taza's men barely knew. Now they waited in this stinking hole like outlaws. Taza stirred the small fire with a stick. She's smarter than you gave her credit for. Clay didn't answer. He'd been turning Nora's words over in his mind since they left. Find what we need. But what did they need? More men? Weapons. He opened his mother's Bible, the pages crackling with age. A folded paper fluttered out. A map of the region with several locations marked in faded ink. One spot near Whitaker's Grace was circled repeatedly. Taza peered over his shoulder. What is this? Clay's pulse quickened. The old Spanish mission. The one that burned down in '65. The one your father helped rebuild before he died. A memory surfaced. Clay's father riding out with a wagon full of supplies, talking about hidden church treasures. He'd never come home. Clay studied the map closer. There, in his mother's neat script, Gideon's gift. Nora's father. The pieces clicked together. The mission had a silver communion set. Real silver. Cale must think it's still there. Taza's eyes gleamed in the firelight. And if we find it first, we buy an army. Clay stood, tucking the Bible into his coat. Let's move. They rode through the night, guided by the map and Taza's uncanny sense of direction. The old mission ruins loomed out of the darkness like a broken skeleton. Clay dismounted, his boots crunching on charred wood. The place still carried the stench of smoke years later. He moved toward what remained of the altar, kicking aside debris. Taza's hiss stopped him cold. Clay, his blood brother, stood frozen near the ruined confessional, his knife drawn. A scrap of fabric fluttered from a nail, a piece of calico dress. Eli's mother had been wearing calico that morning. Clay's blood turned to ice. He wrenched the confessional door open. Inside, propped against the wall, was a crude doll made of sticks and twine. Around its neck hung a note in a child's handwriting. Miss Nora, they got me. Don't come. Eli. Taza cursed in Comanche. They're using the boy as bait. Clay crushed the note in his fist. Cale had miscalculated. He'd thought taking a child would make Nora surrender. Instead, he just ensured McCullough would come for him with everything he had. The first gunshot cracked through the pre-dawn stillness like a whip. Clay crouched behind the crumbling mission wall, his Colt heavy in his hand. Across the clearing, Taza signaled silently. 10 men guarding the old mission storeroom where they'd taken Eli. Too many for a direct assault. Clay's fingers tightened around the pistol grip. He'd promised Nora he'd bring the boy back unharmed. But promises were fragile things in the face of Cale's cruelty. Another shot rang out, followed by muffled shouting. Clay risked a glance around the wall. One of Cale's men dragged Eli into view, the boy's arms pinned behind his back. Even from this distance, Clay could see the tear tracks cutting through the dirt on Eli's face. McCullough. Cale's voice boomed across the clearing. Come out now, or the kid loses a finger. Eli whimpered as the outlaw pressed a knife to his small hand. Clay's vision went red at the edges. He stood slowly, his pistol held high. I'm here. Cale stepped into the open, his grin revealing yellowed teeth. Took you long enough. He motioned to his men. Search him. Rough hands patted Clay down, taking his weapons. Cale circled him like a vulture. Where's the silver? What silver? The backhand came fast, splitting Clay's lip. The mission treasure. Don't play dumb. Your daddy helped hide it. Blood trickled down Clay's chin. He spat at Cale's feet. My father's dead because of you. Cale laughed. No, boy. He's dead because he chose the wrong side. He grabbed Eli's collar, shaking him like a rag doll. Last chance. Where's the silver? Clay locked eyes with the trembling boy. Eli, close your eyes. As the child squeezed his eyes shut, Clay whistled, 2 sharp notes. The arrow took Cale's knife hand first, pinning it to the wooden post behind him. He screamed as more arrows rained down from the trees, sending his men scrambling for cover. Taza's war cry split the air as he and his warriors charged from the forest. Clay dove for Eli, shielding the boy with his body as gunfire erupted around them. Hold on tight. Clay ordered, scooping Eli up. They ran for the tree line as bullets kicked up dirt at their heels. Behind them, Cale wrenched the arrow from his hand with a snarl. Kill them all. Clay shoved Eli into the bushes where Taza waited. Get him to Nora. Taza hesitated only a second before nodding. He grabbed Eli and melted into the forest. Clay turned back to the fight, weaponless. Then he saw it, the glint of metal in the dirt near the mission well. His father's old shovel. As Cale's men regrouped, Clay made his choice. He sprinted for the well, grabbing the shovel as bullets whined past his ears. The ground here was soft, disturbed recently. He dug like a man possessed. 2 feet down, the shovel struck something solid. Clay tore at the dirt with his hands, revealing a rusted metal box. Cale's shot grazed his shoulder. That's mine. Clay wrenched the box open. No silver. Just a single yellowed envelope addressed to him in his mother's handwriting. Another bullet splintered the wood beside his head. Clay stuffed the letter in his shirt and ran for the trees as Cale's howls of rage followed him into the forest. The sun was high by the time Clay stumbled into Whitaker's grace. The ranch buzzed like a kicked beehive. Women carried buckets of water from the well. Children stacked sandbags near the chapel entrance. And at the center of it all stood Nora, directing the preparations with quiet authority. She turned as Clay approached, her eyes going straight to the blood on his shirt. Eli's safe, she said before he could ask. Taza brought him home an hour ago. Clay nodded, suddenly exhausted. He pulled the envelope from his shirt. Found this instead of silver. Nora's breath caught when she saw the handwriting. Your mother's. They retreated to the chapel, where the cool darkness offered respite from the chaos outside. Clay broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. The letter was dated the day his father died. Asterisk, my dearest Clayton. If you're reading this, the worst has happened. Your father rode out today to move the mission silver to safety, not for its monetary worth, but because it holds the names of every slave family our church helped escape. Cale means to use this list to hunt them down. The treasure was never the silver. It was the people. Forgive us for keeping this from you. And forgive yourself, my son. The path ahead is dark, but God goes with you. With all my love. Mother Asterisk. Nora's hand found Clay's as the word sank in. The mission's silver wasn't riches. It was a record of lives saved. And Cale would slaughter every last one to keep his secrets. Outside, a shout went up. Riders coming. Clay stuffed the letter in his pocket and grabbed Nora's shoulders. Get everyone underground. Now. Nora shook her head. We're not hiding anymore. She led him outside where the entire ranch stood waiting. Freedmen with hunting rifles, Comanche warriors with bows, women and children holding whatever weapons they could find. Even Eli clutched a slingshot, his small face set in determination. Taza approached, his face grim. Cale's bringing reinforcements. At least 30 men. Clay looked out over the ragtag group. Farmers, former slaves, orphans. They'd never stand against hardened outlaws. Then Nora stepped forward, holding up his mother's Bible. "We don't fight for silver or land," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "We fight for each other." One by one, the people of Whitaker's Grace moved to stand behind her. Josiah, Louisa, the Comanche warriors, even little Eli, his slingshot at the ready. Clay's throat tightened. This was what his parents had died for, what Nora had built from ashes. He took his place beside her, staring down the road where dust clouds signaled Cale's approach. "Then we fight together." The first gunshots rang out as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky blood red. The siege of Whitaker's Grace had begun. The first wave of attackers came at dawn. Clay crouched behind the overturned wagon, his colt barking as another of Cale's men tumbled from his saddle. Beside him, Josiah reloaded his rifle with steady hands despite the bullets whining past their heads. "They're trying to flank the chapel." Josiah shouted over the gunfire. Clay risked a glance toward the stone building. Nora and the women had taken the children inside, but Cale's men were circling like wolves. If they reached the doors before. A war cry split the air as Taza and his warriors erupted from the tree line, arrows finding their marks in 3 attackers before the outlaws could react. The Comanche fighters melted back into the brush as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving confusion in their wake. "Fall back." Cale's voice carried across the battlefield. His men retreated to the cover of the barn, dragging their wounded with them. The sudden silence was deafening. Clay wiped sweat from his eyes, counting their losses. 2 of Josiah's men with leg wounds. 1 of Taza's warriors with an arrow through his shoulder. No deaths yet, but the next assault would be worse. A soft humming started from the chapel. At first Clay thought his ears were ringing from the gunfire. Then he recognized the tune. Amazing Grace. The chapel door swung open. Nora walked out alone, her hands empty at her sides. The morning sun glinted off the bullet at her throat as she moved deliberately toward the barn where Cale's men hid. Clay's heart stopped. "Nora, get back." She either didn't hear or chose not to. The hymn grew louder as others joined her. Louisa, Josiah's wife, even little Eli, their voices weaving together in the dusty air. Cale stepped into view, his pistol trained on Nora's chest. "Far enough, preacher's daughter." Nora stopped singing but didn't break stride. "It's over, Silas. The silver's gone. The names are safe." A muscle twitched in Cale's jaw. "Then I'll settle for watching you die." Clay was already moving, his boots kicking up dust as he ran toward Nora. He wouldn't make it in time. Cale's finger tightened on the trigger. Thwack! An arrow sprouted from Cale's gun hand, his shot going wild into the dirt. Taza stood atop the chapel roof, already knocking another arrow. Chaos erupted. Cale's men surged forward. Clay reached Nora just as the first outlaw swung at her with a knife. He caught the man's wrist, twisting until bones snapped. "Behind you!" Nora cried. Clay turned to see Cale charging, a Bowie knife gleaming in his good hand. There was no time to draw his pistol. No time to... Bang! Cale staggered, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him, Eli stood trembling, Clay's second Colt smoking in his small hands. The battlefield froze. Cale looked down at the wound in disbelief before collapsing face first into the dirt. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one by one, Cale's men dropped their weapons. The hymn began again, stronger now. Nora pulled Eli close as the boy sobbed into her skirts. Clay retrieved his pistol, his hand steady as he checked the remaining outlaws for weapons. It was over. The burial took place at sundown. They dug the graves on the hill behind the chapel, 3 for Cale's men who hadn't survived the fight, 1 for Cale himself. No markers, just bare earth that would soon forget them. Clay stood apart from the others as Josiah said few words over the dead. He should feel something: relief, satisfaction, maybe even regret. But all he felt was tired. A hand touched his elbow. Nora held out a canteen. "Drink. You've lost blood." He hadn't even noticed the bullet graze on his arm. The water was cool going down his parched throat. The children, sleeping. Eli finally stopped crying an hour ago. Nora's eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He keeps asking if he's a bad person for shooting Cale. Clay studied the fading light on the horizon. Tell him sometimes God uses the smallest hands to do his work. Nora's smile was faint but real. That's almost poetic. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. One by one, the others drifted back to the ranch. Josiah to his family, Louisa to check on the wounded, Taza to stand watch with his warriors. Nora turned to go, but Clay caught her hand. Wait. From his pocket, he pulled his mother's Bible, the one Nora had given him days before. The leather was worn smooth from years of use. He pressed it into her hands. I'm leaving at first light. Nora didn't look surprised. Where will you go? South. There are others like Cale out there. Others who need stopping. He nodded toward the chapel where Eli slept. Someone's got to make sure boys like him grow up safe. Nora traced the Bible's cover with her fingertips. You could stay. We could use a good man. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken promise. Clay allowed himself one moment to imagine it. Waking up to sunrise over Whitaker's grace, working the land alongside Nora, watching Eli grow into a man unhaunted by violence. Then he shook his head. The man I was died in that barn today. Maybe the man I'm meant to be is still out there somewhere. Nora didn't argue. She stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. Then go with God, Clayton McCullough. As she walked back to the chapel, Clay watched until her silhouette disappeared into the warm light of the windows. Then he turned his face to the stars and breathed deep of the night air. For the first time and longer than he could remember, the weight on his soul felt lighter. The dawn would bring a new day, a new path, and maybe, someday, a new way home. 5 years later, the Texas sun beat down on Clay's back as he dismounted outside the familiar whitewashed fence. Whitaker's grace had grown. New barns stood where charred ruins once lay, and the field stretched farther than he remembered, golden with late summer wheat. He hesitated at the gate, suddenly unsure. 5 years was a long time, maybe too long. The squeal of an excited child answered his doubts. Mr. Clay. Mr. Clay. Eli came barreling across the yard, taller now, but still grinning that gap-toothed grin. He skidded to a stop, just short of tackling Clay, suddenly shy. You came back. Clay ruffled the boy's hair, now dark with sweat from whatever chore he'd abandoned. Told you I would. The screen door slammed. Nora stood on the porch, her hands covered in flour, her hair escaping its braid in wild curls. She looked older, fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but her smile was just as warm. You're late, she said, as if he'd only been gone a day rather than half a decade. Clay removed his hat, suddenly conscious of the new scars, the deeper weathering on his face. Had some things to finish. Eli tugged his sleeve. Did you kill lots of bad guys? Eli Whitaker. Nora scolded, but her eyes danced with amusement. Clay knelt to the boy's level. Found better ways to stop him. Courts mostly. A few well-placed words when needed. He reached into his saddlebag. Brought you something. The wooden horse was finely carved, its mane flowing as if caught in an eternal wind. Eli's eyes went wide as he cradled it. Is this ghost wind? Clay confirmed, nodding toward the paint pony grazing nearby. Taza's old warhorse, now retired to pasture. Nora's breath caught. Clay. He straightened, meeting her gaze. Taza sends his regards. Said to tell you the schoolhouse is working out just fine. The schoolhouse. On the reservation. Been teaching the kids to read. Even some of the elders. Clay reached back into his bag and pulled out a familiar leather-bound book. His mother's Bible, now even more worn. Used this mostly. Nora's hands trembled as she took it. When she opened the cover, a small gasp escaped her. Where there had once been 57 notches in the leather, now only one remained, a single cross carved deep and sure. Clay swallowed hard. Figured it was time for new marks. Better ones. The afternoon sun slanted across the porch as Nora studied him, the peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before, the way his gun sat lighter on his hip. Without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped him in a flower-dusted embrace. Eli hooped and threw his arms around them both. "Does this mean you're staying?" Clay looked over their heads toward the chapel, where new stones marked the graves of those lost, toward the fields full of life, toward the future waiting to be written. "Yeah, kid," he said softly. "Reckon it does." And as the Texas wind carried the sound of children laughing from the nearby schoolhouse, Clayton McCullough knew he'd finally come home. Did this story of redemption and second chances touch your heart? Like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming Christian Western romances where broken souls find healing and lost hearts discover grace. Comment below. What was your favorite moment in Clay and Nora's journey? Hit the bell icon to get notified about our next historical romance. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. But the Lord stood with me and gave me strength. 2 Timothy 4 verse 17.